America, 1984. In one quiet town of Maryland, the day began as usual. The sun rose gently, the streets were calm, and no one could have imagined that within weeks this peaceful place would be at the center of one of the most shocking and unjust trials in American history. Kirk Bloodsworth left his home early that morning. He was an ordinary man, a former Marine, now working simple jobs to make a living. People who knew him described him as polite, quiet, and kind. He liked fishing, taking walks near the shore, and reading at night. But that summer, his entire life was about to change forever. It was late August. The air was hot and heavy. That afternoon, a little girl from the neighborhood went out to play and never came back home. When evening came, her parents began to worry. By nightfall, the entire town was searching. Flashlights flickered through the woods. People called her name into the darkness. And then, just before dawn, came the news that would haunt them all. Her body had been found. She had been brutally attacked, assaulted, and strangled. Even hardened police officers said it was one of the most heartbreaking scenes they had ever witnessed. The town went silent in horror. Parents locked their doors, children were kept inside. Everyone asked the same question: who could do such a thing? Police began their investigation immediately. They spoke to neighbors, combed through the woods, collected what little evidence they could. A few witnesses came forward. One woman said she had seen the girl near a white car. Another said a tall, blond man was sitting behind the wheel. That was all the police needed to start looking for someone who fit the description. Soon a name came up: Kirk Bloodsworth. He was tall. He had light-colored hair. He lived not far from the crime scene, and several witnesses said he looked like the man they saw. That small resemblance was enough to change his life forever. Police came to his house and took him in for questioning. Kirk was confused, even frightened. When they accused him of murdering a child, he was speechless. "I didn't do anything. I don't even know her." But they didn't believe him. The country was angry. Newspapers were filled with headlines demanding justice. "Who killed the little girl? Find the monster!" And in that wave of rage, the police and prosecutors felt the pressure to deliver a conviction fast. There was no physical evidence against Kirk, no fingerprints, no hair, no blood. Only 5 witnesses who said, "Yes, I think that's the man I saw." That was enough to change his life forever. Kirk was charged with rape and murder. His lawyers argued there was no proof. They said eyewitnesses often make mistakes. But the crowd outside the courthouse didn't care. They wanted someone to blame. The trial began in 1985. The courtroom was packed. On one side, the victim's grieving family. On the other, Kirk's parents, pale and broken. The atmosphere was heavy. The prosecutor stood before the jury and pointed straight at Kirk. "This man," he said, "is a cold-blooded killer who took the life of an innocent child." One witness after another repeated the same story. "Yes, I saw him near that car." Another said, "I heard his voice." Kirk sat silently. He kept saying, "I'm innocent. I was home that day. I never hurt anyone." But few people were listening. Back then, DNA testing did not exist. Science couldn't yet say who left biological traces at a crime scene. Everything depended on memory, fragile, emotional, unreliable memory. The trial dragged on for weeks. The defense pointed out contradictions. One witness said the man was tall, another said average height. One said his hair was blonde, another said brown. But it didn't matter. The town wanted closure. The nation wanted justice. And so, in the summer of 1985, The judge read the verdict. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked down at the paper and said, "Kirk Bloodsworth, you are found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence is death." A loud gasp echoed through the room. Some people cried, others applauded. Kirk didn't move. He looked down and whispered, "I didn't do it." But no one heard him. He was led away in handcuffs, the youngest man in Maryland's history, to be sentenced to death. In prison, time stopped. The death row cell was cold and narrow. Each morning he woke up to the sound of steel doors slamming shut. Every night he stared at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow would be his last day. He began writing in a notebook, a diary of hope and despair. He prayed. He dreamed of the ocean. He thought of his mother's voice. But most of all, he thought about the little girl. In his dreams, she would appear smiling, peaceful, as if to say, "It wasn't you." Years passed. He never confessed, not once. Even when the prosecutors came to him, saying, "Admit it and we'll spare your life," he refused. He said, "I won't lie to save myself." Then, one day, his lawyer came with news. A new kind of scientific test had been developed. It could match biological evidence to an individual person. It was called DNA analysis. At first, Kirk didn't believe it. "Will that really help me?" His lawyer nodded. "Yes, if the evidence from the crime scene was preserved, we can test it, and if it's not your DNA, you'll be free." They filed the request. The old evidence, the samples from the victim's body, were found in a storage box. They were sent to a laboratory. The weight was unbearable. Kirk prayed every night. He said, "God, let the truth come out." Then one afternoon, his lawyer returned. His eyes were wet. He sat across from Kirk and whispered, "It's not your DNA. It's not even close. You're innocent." Kirk froze. He couldn't breathe. He asked again, "Are you sure?" The lawyer nodded. "Absolutely sure." After almost 9 years behind bars, 2 of them on death row, Kirk Bloodsworth was proven innocent. He became the first person in the United States to be exonerated by DNA evidence. In 1993, the court overturned his conviction. He walked out of prison a free man. He looked up at the sky. The air felt different. The world was bright again. But deep inside, something was broken. He had lost nearly a decade of his life, his freedom, his dignity, and the trust of his community. Yet, he smiled. He said, "I don't hold hate in my heart. Justice may come late, but it comes." His case shook the legal system. Lawmakers across the country began demanding that DNA testing be used in every major criminal case. But one haunting question remained. If Kirk didn't do it, then who did? The DNA didn't match him. It belonged to someone else, someone who had been out there, free, for all those years. Kirk tried to rebuild his life. He spoke at schools, legal conferences, and churches. He told his story again and again, hoping that others would learn from it. He said, "If it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone." But at night, he still had the same dream. The little girl appeared again. She looked at him and said softly, "It wasn't you." He would wake up in the dark, breathing heavily, staring at the ceiling. Even freedom couldn't erase the memories. So he decided to dedicate his life to helping others who were wrongly convicted. He began working with organizations that fought for justice through DNA testing.
He became an advocate, not a victim. But deep down, he still wanted closure. He wanted to know who had really killed that little girl. He wanted the truth, all of it. Years later, a match would finally appear in a national DNA database. A name, a man who looked eerily similar to Kirk. A man who lived nearby in 1984. A man who had already served time for another assault. The truth was about to surface, shocking, tragic, and undeniable.
The metal prison door slammed shut with a deafening clang. At that moment, Kirk's life changed forever. He was no longer a man, just an inmate, a number, a name whispered behind bars. And that name carried a label he could never escape: child murderer. Every morning, the same cold routine. The echoing footsteps, the icy stares of guards, the silence of concrete walls. Each sound reminded him he was living someone else's nightmare. He tried to tell them, "I'm innocent!" But no one listened. No one cared. At night, he would lie on the hard prison cot, staring at the ceiling. How did I end up here? Where did everything go wrong? The same questions circled in his mind. But deep inside, one truth burned bright. He didn't do it. He made himself a promise. I will get out. I will walk free through truth. Months passed. Kirk found work in the prison library. Among old law books and dust, he found something even stronger than hope: purpose. He read about legal appeals, court procedures, wrongful convictions. He studied every case he could find, learning the language of justice from behind bars. He believed, somewhere, somehow, the truth would rise again. Then one day, a new magazine arrived at the library. On the front page was an article about a revolutionary new technology: DNA testing. Kirk's heart started pounding. The article said that DNA could identify a person beyond doubt. Pure science, pure proof. He froze. This could be it, he whispered. The only way to prove he was innocent. But there was a problem. DNA testing was new, expensive, and rarely used. Most lawyers didn't even understand it. Still, Kirk refused to give up. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, to lawyers, journalists, scientists, even members of Congress. He begged them to look at his case again. Most never replied. But one day, a letter came back. It was from Jacqueline McMahon, a defense attorney who had heard about his case. She agreed to help. Together, they began to dig through the evidence. Old photos, testimonies, reports, everything. And then they found it. The biological evidence from the crime scene, still preserved. Inside that evidence lay the truth that could set him free. It was 1992. After almost 10 years behind bars, the samples were finally sent for DNA testing. Kirk prayed every night. "Let the truth come out," he whispered to himself. "Let it end." Weeks turned into months. And then, one afternoon, a guard appeared at his cell door. "Bloodsworth," he said coldly, "your lawyer's here." Kirk's heart raced. He walked down the long hallway, hands trembling. When he entered the visiting room, Jacqueline was standing there, tears in her eyes. She looked at him and said softly, "Kirk, you're free." He froze. The words hung in the air like a miracle. "What?" he asked, barely breathing.
Jacqueline smiled, crying now. "The DNA test cleared you, Kirk. You didn't do it." His knees nearly gave out. He covered his face, sobbing. 10 years of pain, disbelief, and fear came pouring out. For 10 years he had screamed his innocence into silence, and finally, the world had listened. In 1993, the state of Maryland officially exonerated Kirk Bloodsworth. He became the first person in U.S. history to be proven innocent and released from death row through DNA evidence. The news made headlines across the country. People were shocked. How could this happen? How could an innocent man come so close to being executed? But for Kirk, there was no bitterness in that moment, only relief. He stepped out of prison, looked up at the sky, and felt the warmth of sunlight on his face. For the first time in years, he could breathe free air. It was like waking from a decade-long nightmare. Yet freedom didn't erase the scars. He had lost 10 years of his life, 10 years of his youth, 10 years of being called a monster. But instead of hiding, he chose to fight. He dedicated his life to preventing others from suffering the same fate. He spoke in schools, at universities, in front of Congress. He became an advocate for justice reform and DNA testing access for all inmates. He said, "I'm living proof. The system can make mistakes, but science can bring back the truth." His story helped inspire the Innocence Project, an organization that uses DNA evidence to overturn wrongful convictions. Thanks to cases like his, hundreds of men and women were later freed. One journalist once asked him, "What kept you alive in prison?" Kirk thought for a moment. Then he answered quietly, "Hope. I never believed truth could die. Even if I did, the truth wouldn't. It was just waiting to be found." Today, Kirk Bloodsworth's name stands as a symbol of justice and redemption. Documentaries, films, and books have told his story. He became a reminder that justice is powerful but fallible. And what about the real killer? In 1993, the same DNA that freed Kirk identified another man, a convicted rapist already serving time for another crime. The true murderer had finally been found. The nightmare was over. Sometimes Kirk still wakes up in the middle of the night. The sound of the cell door slamming echoes in his memory. But now he smiles, because he knows he survived. He often visits schools, meeting young people, sharing his story. He tells them the same words every time. If you know the truth, never stay silent. Once condemned to die, Kirk Bloodsworth lived to become a beacon of truth. His life proved that even in the darkest injustice, there is always light, and that science, faith, and courage can restore what the world has taken away. This is the story of Kirk Bloodsworth, a man who lost everything but never surrendered his belief in truth, a man who faced death and walked back into the light. The end.